David had always thought of himself as an ordinary man. At 54, his salt and pepper hair was thinning, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but Claire still looked at him the same way she had 27 years ago when they'd first met in college. Their life together wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. A comfortable home filled with photographs, 2 children now studying at universities, and plans for trips they would take once retirement came around. It began on a Tuesday morning in April. David was making coffee when Claire mentioned the headache. "It's nothing," she said, rubbing her temple. "Just didn't sleep well." David watched her take 2 aspirin with her orange juice, noticing how the morning light caught in her chestnut hair, now threaded with silver. He kissed her goodbye and headed to work at the engineering firm where he'd been employed for nearly 2 decades, thinking nothing more of it. But the headaches continued. For 3 weeks, Claire dismissed them as stress or allergies or needed new reading glasses. When David suggested seeing a doctor, she laughed it off. "For a headache, don't be silly." Until the morning she dropped a mug of tea, her right hand suddenly weak. The shattered pieces scattered across their kitchen floor as David rushed to her side. The look in her eyes, confusion mixed with fear, made his heart stop. "I think," she said slowly, "maybe we should call the doctor after all." The following days blurred together. Doctor's appointments, tests, specialists, more tests. David took notes at each visit, filling a small notebook with medical terms he researched late at night while Claire slept. Their family doctor had referred them to a neurologist who ordered an MRI just to rule things out. David remembered how casually the doctor had said those words, as if they were discussing something as routine as a blood pressure check. The waiting room of the imaging center had been quiet except for the soft jazz playing overhead. Claire squeezed his hand and whispered, "Whatever happens, we'll handle it together." David nodded, trying to match her calm. She had always been the stronger one. 3 days later, they sat across from Dr. Patterson, a neurologist with kind eyes, and a gentle voice that somehow made the terrible words even worse. "Glioblastoma," she said, pointing to a bright area on the brain scan displayed on her computer screen. "An aggressive brain tumor located in the right frontal lobe." David felt the room tilt slightly. He gripped the arms of his chair, forcing himself to focus on the doctor's words. "What does that mean?" Claire asked, her voice steady. "In terms of treatment?" Dr. Patterson leaned forward. "We'll need to act quickly. I'd like to schedule surgery to remove as much of the tumor as possible, followed by radiation and chemotherapy." "And the prognosis?" Claire pressed. The pause that followed seemed to stretch for hours. David knew, even before the doctor spoke, that their lives had changed forever. With treatment, patients typically live 6 to 12 months after diagnosis. "I'm so sorry." David couldn't remember the drive home. Claire had taken the keys from him in the parking lot, recognizing he was in no state to drive. She turned on the radio to fill the silence, but neither of them heard the music. At home, they sat at their kitchen table, the afternoon sun streaming through windows that needed cleaning. Such a normal detail to notice on the worst day of their lives. "We should call the kids," Claire said finally. Their daughter Lily was studying marine biology 3 states away. Their son Jack was in his 2nd year of architecture school. Both had chosen paths that made them happy, and both called home regularly with stories of classes and friends and futures stretching endlessly ahead. "What do we tell them?" David's voice cracked. It was the first time he'd spoken since leaving the doctor's office. Claire reached across the table and took his hands in hers. "The truth. But not everything at once. They don't need to hear numbers or statistics tonight." That evening, they set up a video call. David watched as Claire somehow found the strength to tell their children she was sick, that she would need treatment, that they shouldn't worry about coming home right away because Dad and I have this handled for now. After the call ended, after promising Lily and Jack they would update them tomorrow, after assuring them that yes, they were okay, David finally broke. The tears came suddenly, violently, his body shaking as Claire held him close on their living room couch. "I can't lose you," he whispered against her shoulder. "I don't know how to do this." "I know," she said, her own tears falling silently. "I know." Later that night, When Claire had fallen into an exhausted sleep, David sat alone on their back porch. The neighborhood was quiet, most houses dark except for the occasional glow of a television through curtained windows, normal lives continuing while his own had been shattered. He pulled out his phone, opened a browser and typed, glioblastoma survival rate. The information confirmed what the doctor had told them. 6 to 15 months with treatment. Almost. No one survived beyond 2 years. His thumb hovered over the screen as tears blurred his vision again. Then he closed the browser, deleted his search history, and put the phone away. Claire wouldn't want him spending the night looking at statistics. The next morning brought a strange sense of purpose. They had a fight ahead, and David was determined to be the partner Claire needed. He made lists, researched treatment centers, called their insurance company. Claire contacted her boss at the elementary school where she taught 4th grade, arranging for extended leave. One day at a time became their mantra. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Surgery was scheduled quickly. Dr. Patterson introduced them to an oncologist, a radiation specialist, and a care coordinator who helped navigate the bewildering maze of appointments and paperwork. Their children came home despite Claire's protests that they should stay in school. Lily arrived first, her face pale but determined as she hugged her mother at the airport. Jack followed the next day, bringing a stack of books on nutrition and alternative therapies that Claire accepted with a gentle smile. The night before the surgery, after the kids had finally gone to bed, Claire found David in their bedroom staring at nothing. "Hey," she said softly, sitting beside him on the edge of their bed. "Where are you right now?" He looked at her, memorizing her face, the curve of her cheek, the small scar above her eyebrow from a childhood fall, the laugh lines around her mouth. "I'm trying to be brave," he admitted. "I'm not doing a very good job." Claire took his face in her hands. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, it just means you keep going anyway." "I'm terrified," he whispered. "Me too," she said. "But we've faced hard things before. Remember when Jack was born? How sick I was?" David nodded. Their son's birth had been complicated, with Claire developing an infection that kept her hospitalized for nearly 2 weeks. "We got through that," she reminded him. "We'll get through this too, whatever through ends up meaning." They held each other close that night, neither sleeping much. David listened to Claire's breathing, felt the warmth of her beside him, and tried to push away the thought that these moments were now counted, limited, precious, beyond measure. Morning arrived too quickly. As they prepared to leave for the hospital, Claire paused at their front door, looking back at their home. "What is it?" David asked. "Just remembering," she said with a small smile. "All the good days we've had here. All the ordinary moments that weren't so ordinary after all." David wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "We'll have more," he promised, wanting desperately to believe it himself. "Yes," Claire agreed, leaning into him. "Different, maybe, but still ours." They stepped outside together into the early morning light, facing whatever came next the only way they knew how, side by side, one step at a time. The hospital waiting. Room clock ticked loudly as David sat with his hands clasped tightly between his knees. Claire had been in surgery for nearly 5 hours. Their children, Lily and Jack, sat nearby, Jack pacing occasionally before settling back down, Lily reading the same magazine page over and over without turning it. "Family of Claire Matthews?" a nurse called, and all three jumped to their feet. The neurosurgeon, Dr. Winters, still wore his surgical cap when he met them in the consultation room. His expression gave nothing away as he sat across from them. "We were able to remove about 60% of the tumor," he explained, showing them images on his tablet. "Any more would have risked affecting her speech and motor functions." "Is 60% enough?" Jack asked, his voice small despite his tall frame. Dr. Winters placed his hands flat on the table. "It gives us a good foundation for the next steps. The radiation and chemotherapy will target what remains." "When can we see her?" David asked, the only question that mattered to him now. She's in recovery. A nurse will come get you soon. Claire looked smaller somehow when they finally entered her room, pale against the white sheets, her head wrapped in bandages, tubes, and monitors everywhere. David's heart squeezed painfully in his chest, but he forced a smile as her eyes fluttered. Open. Hey there, he said softly, taking her hand. Did they get it all? Claire's voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. David hesitated just long enough for her to understand. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again with determination. Well, then she said, on to round 2. The days after the surgery established their new normal. Claire remained in the hospital for a week before coming home. David took indefinite leave from work, using his accumulated vacation days and the family medical leave his company offered. Their home transformed, a hospital bed in the den, medications organized in daily pill boxes, a whiteboard tracking appointments and symptoms. Lily reluctantly returned to school after 2 weeks but called every evening. Jack was more stubborn, transferring his classes to online versions so he could stay through Claire's initial treatments. Friends and neighbors organized meal deliveries, created a schedule for driving Claire to appointments, and kept the house stocked with groceries and necessities. I feel like I'm attending my own funeral sometimes, Claire confided to David one evening, after a parade of visitors had finally left. Everyone brings food and speaks in hushed voices. David laughed despite himself. Should I tell them to be louder? Tell them to be normal, Claire said. I'm not gone yet. That became their approach moving forward. Claire started radiation treatments 2 weeks after surgery, 5 days a week for 6 weeks. The routine was grueling, but gave their days structure. Mornings were for rest, afternoons for treatment, evenings for family time. On good days, Claire would sit in the garden, help cook dinner, or work on photo albums she was creating for each child. What are you doing? David asked one night, finding her surrounded by photographs at 2 a.m. Making memories last, she replied, simply. After the initial shock wore off, David found unexpected moments of joy breaking through their new reality. They laughed harder at small jokes, celebrated tiny victories, and spent hours talking in ways they hadn't since their early marriage. One night they dragged their mattress into the backyard to watch a meteor shower, bundled in blankets against the cool autumn air. Remember our honeymoon? Claire asked as streaks of light flashed across the sky. That cabin in Vermont with the leaky roof? David smiled in the darkness. It rained for 4 straight days. Best 4 days of my life, she said, finding his hand beneath the blankets. The radiation treatments left Claire exhausted and her skin burned, but her spirits remained remarkably steady. Only once did David find her crying alone, sitting on the bathroom floor at midnight, clumps of her chestnut hair scattered around her. I was going to cut it anyway, she said, looking up at him with red-rimmed eyes. Beat it to the punch. Without a word, David found scissors and his electric razor. In their bathroom, with gentle hands, he removed what remained of her hair, kissing her head when he finished. Still beautiful, he whispered. The next day, Jack came home with his own head, shaved. Solidarity, he explained with a shrug when Claire gasped. 2 days later, a package arrived from Lily containing a photo of her newly shaved head and a collection of colorful scarves for her mother. By the 3rd month after diagnosis, Claire had completed radiation and started chemotherapy pills. The side effects were brutal: nausea, fatigue, weight loss. But she took each day as it came. Their house filled with small comforts, soft blankets, herbal teas, wind chimes outside the windows that sang with each breeze. I want to see the ocean, Claire announced one morning in June. David looked up from his coffee. The doctor said, I know what the doctor said, Claire interrupted. Limited travel, nothing too strenuous. But David, we always talked about showing the kids that little coastal town where we spent our 5th anniversary. They debated, consulted with her doctors, and finally compromised. A weekend trip, only 3 hours drive, with all medications, emergency contacts, and a list of nearby hospitals. Jack rented a comfortable van that could accommodate Claire if she needed to lie down during the journey. Those 3 days became precious beyond measure. Claire walked the shoreline with Lily while David and Jack photographed everything. Claire's smile as she collected shells, her face tilted toward the sun, her hands cupped around a mug of hot chocolate on the beach house porch. Though she tired, easily, her joy was palpable. "This is what I want them to remember," she told David that night as they listened to the waves from their bedroom. "Not hospitals and medications. Days like today." In August, 5 months after diagnosis, Claire's scan showed the tumor growing again despite treatment. Her oncologist, Dr. Chen, presented options: a different chemotherapy regimen, a clinical trial at a hospital 3 states away, or focusing on quality of life over aggressive treatment. David wanted to fight, try everything, go anywhere, do whatever it took. But when he looked at Claire, he saw that she had already made her decision. "I want time at home," she said quietly. "Good days, not days spent chasing something that might not work." That evening, after the kids had gone to bed, David sat alone, on their porch swing, anger and grief warring inside him. "Room for one more?" Claire asked, standing in the doorway with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. He moved over silently, and she settled beside him, her body now so much thinner against his. "You're angry," she observed. "Not at you," he said quickly. "I know." She rested her head on his shoulder. "You want to fix this. You've always been my fixer." David stared out at their darkened yard. "I can't fix this." "No," she agreed softly. "But you can help me live the time I have left." She took his hand, her fingers cool against his palm. "I need to know you'll be okay after. That's what scares me most." "I won't be okay," he admitted, his voice breaking. "Not at first," Claire said. "But eventually. Promise me you'll try." He couldn't answer, his throat too tight with unshed tears. "Claire," continued, "remember when my dad died? You told me grief is just love with nowhere to go. I like that." David remembered. Claire had been devastated by her father's sudden death 8 years earlier. "I found places for that love," she said. "In memories, in stories I told the kids about him, in the garden bench we built in his honor. You'll find places too." They sat in silence, the porch swing creaking gently beneath them. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A car passed on. Their quiet street. Normal sounds of a world that would continue turning. "I promised to try," David finally whispered, the words costing him dearly. Claire squeezed his hand. "That's all I need to know." The next morning, Claire asked for paper and her favorite pen. Over the coming weeks, she wrote letters to David, to each of their children, to friends, to her future grandchildren. She created playlists for holidays and birthdays. She recorded voice messages on her good days. She planted bulbs in the garden that would bloom the following spring. "My time capsules," she called them with a smile. Autumn arrived with cool breezes that Claire said felt like heaven against her skin. They celebrated her birthday with a small party, close friends and family gathering in their backyard. Claire wore a blue dress and a patterned scarf around her head, laughing as Jack told stories from their family vacations years ago. As the gathering wound down, David found her sitting alone by the small fire pit, watching the flames dance. "Happy birthday," he said, joining her. Claire smiled, her face thinner now but her eyes still bright. "It was a good one." David put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close against the evening chill. "What are you thinking about?" She was quiet for a moment before answering. "That I've been lucky. So very lucky, David. Not everyone finds what we had." He held her tighter, these borrowed days both a gift and a weight, each moment precious beyond words. October brought colder days and a noticeable decline in Claire's condition. The changes happened gradually at first. More naps during the day, less appetite at dinner, occasional confusion about small details. David kept a notebook tracking her medications and symptoms, information to share with the hospice nurse who now visited 3 times a week. "You don't need to write everything down," Claire told him one afternoon, watching him make notes after she'd struggled to remember their neighbor's name. "Dr. Chen said it helps them adjust your care," David replied, not looking up from the page. "David." Her tone made him stop writing. "Come sit with me instead." He joined her on the couch, setting the notebook aside. Claire had lost more weight, her cheekbones now prominent under her skin. But her eyes, those hadn't changed, still the same warm brown that had captivated him decades ago. "How are you holding up?" she asked, surprising him. It was usually his question to her. David started to say, "Fine," the automatic response, but stopped himself. They had always been honest with each other. "Some days are harder than others," he admitted. Claire nodded, reaching for his hand. "I'm worried about you not sleeping." He'd tried to hide his midnight wanderings, the hours spent researching treatments. She'd declined the nights he sat watching her breathe, but of course she knew. "I sleep," he protested weakly. "Liar," she said with a small smile. "I may be the one dying, but you're the one who looks terrible." The joke startled a laugh from him, unexpected and rusty. Claire had always been able to do that, cut through the heaviness with simple truth. "Promise me something," she continued, her fingers tightening around his. "When Lily and Jack come home next weekend, take an afternoon for yourself. Go fishing at the lake, or see a movie. Anything away from this house." I need you to," she interrupted. "Please." How could he refuse her anything now? David nodded, throat tight. The hospice nurse, Nancy, arrived later that afternoon. She checked Claire's vital signs, adjusted her medications, and helped her with a sponge bath. David used the time to rake leaves in the yard, the physical exertion a welcome distraction. Through the window he could see Nancy and Claire laughing about something, and the sight both warmed and broke his heart. Afterward, Nancy found him in the kitchen making tea. "She's having a good day today," she said, washing her hands at the sink. "Those might get fewer, so treasure them." David nodded, focusing on the tea bags, the cups, anything but Nancy's gentle expression. "Are you getting support for yourself?" she asked. "There's a group that meets at the community center for caregivers. I'm fine," David said automatically. Nancy dried her hands on a kitchen towel. "Everyone says that," she observed. "No one means it." After she left, David brought tea to Claire, who was looking through one of the photo albums she'd been creating. "Look at how young we were," she said, pointing to their wedding picture. David at 27, Claire at 25, both glowing with happiness and possibility. "You still had all your hair. And you had that awful perm," he teased, settling beside her. "It was fashionable," she protested, smiling at the memory. They spent the afternoon looking through photographs, remembering vacations, birthdays, ordinary Sundays, their life together captured in frozen moments. "I want to be cremated," Claire said suddenly, closing the album. David tensed. They'd had this conversation before, but it didn't get easier. "I know," he said quietly. "And I want some of my ashes scattered at the beach house. The rest you can keep or put in the garden under the maple tree. Whatever feels right to you." David nodded, unable to speak. "The letters for the kids are in my dresser drawer," she continued. "There's one for you too, but promise you won't read it until after." "Claire!" "And I updated my will back in July. Everything's in order." David took her hand, stopping her. "Please, not today." Claire studied his face, then nodded. "Okay, not today." That night, Claire woke around midnight, confused and in pain. David called the hospice hotline and a nurse talked him through adjusting her medication. As the pain medicine took effect, Claire's breathing slowed, her body relaxing. "Stay," she murmured as he started to move from the edge of the bed. David stretched out beside her, careful not to disturb the IV line in her arm. In the dim light of the bedside lamp, he watched her face, memorizing every detail. "Tell me about when we met," Claire whispered, her eyes still closed. It was a story they both knew by heart, but David understood her need to hear it again. "It was my senior year, your junior year, Professor Wilson's economics class. You sat behind me," Claire added, a faint smile on her lips. "You always wore your hair up with those little pencils stuck in it," David continued. "I spent the entire semester trying to think of a reason to talk to you, but you never did. Not until finals week. David smiled at the memory. I spilled my coffee all over your textbook. On purpose, Claire accused sleepily. Maybe a little, he admitted. I offered to buy you a new one, but I said you could just buy me dinner instead. Boldest woman I'd ever met, David said, gently brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Claire's breathing deepened as she drifted back to sleep. David stayed awake, keeping watch through the night. The weekend brought both their children home. Lily arrived first, her face composed until she saw her mother. Claire had moved permanently to the hospital bed in the den, no longer able to manage the stairs. The weight loss was more apparent now, and the medications made her drowsy much of the time. Hi, Mom, Lily said, leaning down to hug her carefully. My beautiful girl, Claire replied, her voice stronger in her daughter's presence. Tell me everything about school. Jack arrived that evening, bringing dinner from Claire's favorite Italian restaurant. They ate together in the den, Claire managing only a few bites but smiling as her family talked around her. For a few hours, it almost felt normal. The next day, while Jack took Claire for a slow walk around the garden in her wheelchair, Lily cornered David in the kitchen. You look exhausted, Dad, she said bluntly. When's the last time you left the house? David shrugged, busying himself with the dishes. Mom asked me to make you go out for a while, Lily continued. She's worried about you. She shouldn't be worrying about me, David said, his voice sharper than intended. Lily put her hand on his arm, stopping his nervous movement. Dad, Mom needs to know you'll be okay. Let her have that. Put that way, how could he refuse? David dried his hands and allowed Lily to push him toward the door. Just for an hour, he conceded. He drove to the lake where he used to take the kids fishing, parked near the water, and finally allowed himself to break down completely. Alone in his car, David cried for everything they were losing, for the future that would never be, for Claire's pain and his own helplessness. When he had no tears left, he sat watching the water, letting the quiet heal something in him. True to his word, he returned home an hour later, feeling strangely lighter. The following week brought more changes. Claire began sleeping most of the day, waking only for short periods. The hospice nurse increased her visits to daily, adjusting medications to keep her comfortable. David set up a cot in the den to sleep near her, alert to every sound she made. Their closest friends came to say goodbye, keeping visits brief as Claire tired easily. Her former teaching colleagues brought a quilt made from t-shirts from school, events over the years. Their elderly neighbor, who had known them since they bought the house, brought flowers from her garden every other day. So much love in this house, Claire whispered to David after visitors had left one evening. Remember that later. One clear November morning, Claire asked to sit outside. Though the day was chilly, David bundled her in blankets and moved her wheelchair to the patio where they could see the maple tree, now ablaze with red and gold leaves. Remember when we planted that? Claire asked, her voice faint but clear. First spring in the house, David replied, sitting beside her. You were pregnant with Lily, Claire smiled. You said it would grow as our family grew. They sat in comfortable silence, watching leaves drift down in the gentle breeze. I'm not afraid anymore, Claire said after a while. David took her hand, paper-thin skin over delicate bones. What changed? She turned to look at him, her eyes bright despite the illness that had ravaged her body. I realized I'll live on in you, in the kids, in how you see the world because I was part of your life. That night, Jack and Lily arrived, again, alerted by the hospice nurse that Claire's condition was deteriorating rapidly. They took turns sitting with her, talking softly, playing her favorite music. David barely left her side, catching sleep in short bursts when one of the children took over. In the quiet hours before dawn, Claire opened her eyes and looked directly at David with sudden clarity. I need to tell you something, she said, her voice barely audible. David leaned closer, his heart racing. I'm here, love. You gave me everything I ever wanted, she whispered. Thank you for our life. Tears blurred his vision as he pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Thank you for choosing me," he managed to say. "Get the kids," she said, her voice fading. When Lily and Jack joined them, Claire smiled at her family, gathered around her bed. "Remember how loved you are," she told them. "By me always and by your father." As morning light began to filter through the curtains, Claire's breathing became irregular. The family moved closer, David carefully gathering her into his arms as their children held her hands. They whispered words of love, shared memories, allowed tears to fall without shame. In the gentle quiet of early morning, with the first birds beginning to sing outside, Claire took a final breath in David's embrace and then was gone. The days after Claire's passing moved in slow motion. David felt like he was underwater, sounds muffled and movement sluggish as he went through necessary motions. The hospice nurse came one final time, gently guiding him through what needed to be done. The funeral home arrived, treating Claire's body with quiet dignity that David appreciated even through his fog of grief. Lily took charge of calling family and close friends, while Jack sat with his father at the kitchen table, making sure he ate something, drank water, took breaks from staring blankly at the wall. Together they moved through those first terrible hours. "We should look at the arrangements Mom made," Lily said that evening, her voice scratchy from crying and making calls. Claire had planned everything: cremation, a simple memorial service, at their home rather than a church, even suggestions for music and readings, her organized nature extending beyond her life, a final gift to those she left behind. "She thought of everything," Jack said, looking through Claire's notebook. David nodded, unable to speak. Of course she had. Claire had always been the planner, the one who remembered birthdays and anniversaries, who kept their lives running smoothly. Even in dying, she had tried to ease their burden. The memorial service was held the following weekend. Friends and family filled their home and spilled into the backyard despite the November chill. Claire's former students, now adults with children of their own, came to share stories of how she had influenced their lives. Colleagues brought food and flowers. Neighbors helped set up chairs and cleared away dishes. David moved through it all in a daze, accepting hugs and condolences, hearing stories about his wife that sometimes made him smile despite the ache in his chest. Lily and Jack stayed close, the three of them a unit within the crowd. "Your Claire was one of a kind," said Robert, their elderly neighbor who had known them since they first moved in. "Never saw her without a smile, even these last months." David nodded, grateful for the simple truth of the statement. She was. As evening approached and guests began to leave, David found himself alone in their bedroom for the first time since Claire had moved to the hospital bed downstairs. Her clothes still hung in the closet, her books stacked on the nightstand, her reading glasses folded neatly beside them. The room smelled faintly of the lavender lotion she had used every night before bed. He sat heavily on the edge of the mattress, exhaustion crashing over him. From downstairs came the sounds of Lily and Jack cleaning up, quiet conversation and occasional laughter as they shared memories with the few remaining guests. Life continuing somehow. David's eyes fell on Claire's dresser, where he knew the letters she had mentioned were stored. He wasn't ready, not yet. Instead, he lay down on her side of the bed, pressed his face into her pillow, and finally allowed himself to fully break down. Later that night, a soft knock at the door roused him. Jack stood in the doorway, concern etched on his young face. "We're worried," he said simply. "You disappeared." David sat up, embarrassed to be caught in such a state. "Just needed a minute." Jack nodded, not fooled. "Lily made tea, and there's still some of that cake Mrs. Wilson brought." "I'll be down in a minute," David promised. When Jack left, David took a deep breath and forced himself to stand. Claire would want him to be with their children now. They were hurting too. Downstairs, Lily and Jack sat at the kitchen table, both looking as exhausted as he felt. A plate of cake sat untouched in the center, 3 mugs of tea steaming beside it. "I think Mom would be pleased with today," Lily said as David joined them. So many people loved her. She kept all their Christmas cards, Jack added. Remember that box in her closet? David nodded. Every single one, going back 20 years. They talked late into the night, sharing memories of Claire, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying. It was the first time since her diagnosis that they had spoken so freely about her, without fear of causing pain or sadness in her presence. The next morning, Lily and Jack began the painful process of sorting through their mother's belongings. David couldn't bring himself to help, instead busying himself with answering messages of condolence and writing thank you notes to those who had brought food or flowers. "Dad," Lily called from the bedroom that afternoon, "we found something you should see." She handed him a small wooden box he'd never seen before. Inside were dozens of small notes, each dated, going back years. He unfolded one from 15 years earlier. "David brought me coffee in bed this morning for no reason except he knows I love it." Another from just 6 months ago. "Even with everything happening, David made me laugh today. What a gift that is." She kept a happiness journal, Lily explained, her eyes wet. "And you're in almost every entry." That night, after the kids had gone to bed, David finally opened the letter Claire had left for him. Her handwriting was shaky but still unmistakably hers. "My dearest David," it began. "If you're reading this, then I've gone ahead of you on the next journey. I'm sorry to leave you with the harder task of staying behind. You've been the greatest joy of my life, and I hope I've been the same for you. Please don't spend too much time looking backward. Memories are precious, but they're not meant to be a place we live. The kids will need you, and you'll need them. Let them help you, even when it feels easier to shut down. I've loved you through 3 decades, 2 children, 1 mortgage, countless arguments, endless laughter, and more joy than I ever thought possible. That love doesn't end just because I'm not there to say the words aloud anymore. Find your way back to joy, David. Not right away. Grief needs its time, too. But eventually. Promise me that. All my love. Always, Claire." David read the letter 3 times before carefully folding it and putting it back in its envelope. He would read it again tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that, until the words became part of him. In the weeks that followed, David moved through life mechanically. Lily returned to school after making him promise to call every day. Jack stayed longer, worried about leaving his father alone, but eventually had to return to his studies as well. The house echoed with silence. David avoided the den where Claire had spent her final days, sleeping instead on the couch or in their bed when he could bear it. He returned to work part-time, grateful for the distraction but exhausted by the effort of normal conversation, of answering, "How are you?" when the true answer was too painful to give. Friends checked in regularly, bringing meals or stopping by for coffee. Nancy, the hospice nurse, called once to see how he was doing and suggested a grief support group again. David thanked her politely, but didn't commit to attending. Christmas approached, bringing with it a new wave of grief. Their first holiday without Claire. David considered ignoring it completely, but found a note in Claire's handwriting among the Christmas decorations. "Put the tree in the bay window this year. I've always thought it would look nice there." Despite himself, David followed her instructions, setting up the artificial tree they'd used for years. He couldn't bring himself to decorate it, though, leaving the boxes of ornaments closed in the attic. When Lily and Jack came home for the holiday break, they found the bare tree and their father thinner, grayer, and quieter than when they'd left. "Oh, Dad," Lily said, hugging him tightly. That night they ordered pizza and decorated the tree together, sharing stories about each ornament, the handmade ones from when the kids were small, the glass balls Claire collected each year, the star on top that had been a wedding gift. "Mom would love this," Jack said when they finished, the tree glowing with lights in the darkened living room. For the first time in weeks, David felt something other than numbness or pain. A tiny flicker of warmth at being with his children, at honoring Claire's wishes, at continuing traditions even when it hurt. On Christmas morning, they exchanged simple gifts and made Claire's traditional breakfast casserole from her recipe card. David found himself smiling at Jack's attempt to flip pancakes, at Lily's delight in the photo album he'd put together for her. "I have something else for you both," he said after breakfast. From his pocket, he pulled 2 small velvet bags. "Your mom wanted you to have these." Inside each bag was a delicate gold chain with a small pendant, a compass for Jack, a tiny book for Lily. Claire had chosen them months ago, asking David to give them to the children on their first Christmas without her. She said the compass was to remind you that you'll always find your way, even when the path isn't clear, David told Jack. And the book is because stories connect us even when we're apart. Lily wiped tears as she fastened the necklace around her throat. "She's still taking care of us." "She always will be," David said, his voice thick. After the holidays, the children returned to school and David faced the new year alone. January brought snow that he shoveled mechanically, bills that he paid on time, a house that needed cleaning, and maintenance despite his lack of enthusiasm for any of it. One evening, sorting through mail, he found a flyer for the grief support group Nancy had mentioned. It met on Thursday evenings at the community center just a few blocks away. David tossed it aside, then retrieved it from the trash an hour later. That Thursday, he drove to the community center but sat in his car for 20 minutes, unable to make himself go inside. The following week, he made it as far as the building's entrance before turning back. The third week, urged by a text from Lily asking how he was really doing, David finally walked through the door. The room held about a dozen people of various ages, sitting in a circle of folding chairs. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes approached as he hesitated in the doorway. "First time?" she asked gently. David nodded, suddenly unable to speak. "I'm Beth," she said. "My husband died 14 months ago. Cancer." "David," he managed. "My wife. 2 months ago." Beth nodded in understanding. "The early days are the hardest. Come sit. You don't have to talk if you don't want to." David followed her to an empty chair, heart pounding uncomfortably. As the meeting began and others shared their stories, parents who had lost children, children who had lost parents, partners who had lost their other halves, David felt something shift inside him. These people understood in a way no one else could. When his turn came, David surprised himself by speaking. "Her name was Claire," he began, "and I don't know how to live in a world without her in it." Around the circle, heads nodded in recognition of a truth they all shared. Spring arrived quietly, snowdrops and crocuses pushing through the soil in the garden Claire had loved. David stood at the kitchen window one morning, coffee in hand, watching as the flowers Claire had planted the previous fall emerged exactly where she said they would. 6 months had passed since her death, though sometimes it felt like yesterday and other times like a lifetime ago. The grief support group had become an unexpected anchor in his week. Each Thursday evening, David joined the circle of people who understood the particular weight he carried. They talked about anger, guilt, the strange moments of forgetfulness when you turned to share something with a person who was no longer there. They talked about moving forward without moving on, about carrying love that had nowhere to go. "I cleared out her closet yesterday," David told the group one evening in April. "Kept putting it off for months." Beth, who had become something of a friend, nodded in understanding. "How did it go?" "Found a birthday present she'd already bought for our daughter," David said, his voice catching. "Wrapped and everything with a card she'd written." The others waited patiently as he collected himself. "But I also found her favorite sweater," he continued. "The soft blue one she always wore on Sunday mornings. I put it in my dresser drawer instead of the donation box." "You're allowed to keep things," someone across the circle said gently. David nodded. "I know that now." Lily called more regularly than Jack, but both checked in several times a week. Their concern was palpable even through text messages and video calls. David made an effort to sound positive, to ask about their studies and friends, to be the father they needed even when it took all his energy. "You look better, Dad," Lily observed during a video call in late April. "Less haunted?" David suggested with a small smile. "I was going to say tired," she replied. "Are you sleeping better?" He was, actually. The bone-deep exhaustion of early Grief had begun to lift, replaced by a quieter sadness that felt almost manageable. Most nights, he admitted. Started taking walks after dinner, helps clear my head. Mom would be glad, Lily said softly. David nodded, thinking of Claire's letter, her wish for him to find his way back to joy. He wasn't there yet, not even close, but perhaps he was on the path. The following weekend, Jack came home unexpectedly, arriving Friday evening with no warning. Just felt like being home, he explained when David expressed surprise. That okay? David embraced his son, struck again by how tall he'd grown, how his shoulders had broadened in the past year. Always, he said simply. They grilled steaks for dinner and sat on the back porch afterward, watching fireflies appear in the gathering dusk. Jack seemed quieter than usual, lost in thought. Everything okay at school? David asked finally. Jack nodded, then shook his head. It's not school, it's... He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like Claire that David's heart clenched. I got offered an internship for the summer. Really good opportunity, architecture firm in Chicago. Jack, that's wonderful. But it means I wouldn't be here, Jack said, looking at his father. With you. David understood then. His son had been worried about leaving him alone for the summer, had perhaps even considered turning down the opportunity. Jack, David said carefully, I want you to listen to me. I'm going to be okay. Your mom would want you to take that internship. But, no, buts, David interrupted. I've got the support group, neighbors checking in, friends from work. Even started having lunch with your Uncle Tom every few weeks. Jack studied his father's face, looking for the truth. I miss your mom every day, David continued honestly. That's not going to change. But I'm learning to live with it. You and Lily have your lives to build. That's what we always wanted for you. After a long moment, Jack nodded. Okay, I'll take it. Later that night, after Jack had gone to bed, David sat alone on the porch looking up at the stars. He got the internship, he said softly, as if Claire could hear him. You'd be so proud of him. Talking to Claire had become a habit in recent months. Not in a way that worried him, but as a comfort, a connection to the woman who had shared his life for so long. Sometimes, in quiet moments, he could almost hear what she would say in response. May brought Jack's college graduation. David and Lily drove together to attend the ceremony, both feeling Claire's absence keenly during what should have been a family celebration. They cheered loudly when Jack crossed the stage, Lily wiping tears that were both happy and sad. Mom would have been embarrassing us all by now, she whispered to David. Remember how she was at my high school graduation? David smiled at the memory. Claire had brought an actual cowbell to ring when Lily's name was called. She was so proud of both of you, he said, still is wherever she is. That evening, after a celebration dinner at Jack's favorite restaurant near campus, David presented his son with a small box. From your mom, he explained as Jack opened it to reveal a handsome watch. She picked it out last summer. Inside the watch case was a note in Claire's handwriting. For all your future successes. Love, Mom. Jack swallowed hard, fastening the watch on his wrist with slightly shaking hands. How did she always know exactly the right thing? That was her superpower, David agreed. The summer passed more quickly than David expected. Jack moved to Chicago for his internship, calling home twice a week with excited updates about projects he was working on. Lily spent a month at home before leaving for a research position at a marine laboratory on the coast. Alone again, David settled into a new routine. Mornings in the garden Claire had loved, afternoons at work where he'd returned to full-time hours, evenings with books or occasionally dinner with friends who had started inviting him out again. The grief support group continued to be a Thursday constant, though now he often found himself offering comfort to newer members rather than always seeking it himself. In August, Beth from the support group suggested a group of them volunteer at the community garden project. I kill every plant I touch, David protested. Then you can build the new raised beds, she countered. Use those engineering skills for good. To his surprise, David enjoyed the work, the physical labor, the sense of creating something useful, the casual conversation with other volunteers. He found himself looking forward to Saturday mornings at the garden, returning home pleasantly tired with dirt under his fingernails. Claire would get a kick out of me gardening, he told Beth one day as they took a water break. She always said I couldn't tell a weed from a flower. Tell me about her, Beth said, sitting beside him on a wooden bench. What was she like? David smiled, finding that the memories brought more comfort than pain now. She was the most alive person I've ever known, he said. Curious about everything, always planning the next adventure. Terrible cook, but tried anyway. Could make friends with anyone. Cashiers, taxi drivers, people in line at the grocery store. Beth listened, smiling at his stories. When he finished, she said, "She sounds wonderful." She was, David agreed. The best part of my life. And yet, Beth observed gently, you're still here, still living. David considered this. I am, he said, somewhat surprised by the realization. Not the life I expected, but still, a life worth living, Beth suggested. Yes, David said slowly. I think that's what Claire wanted me to understand. When autumn returned, bringing the first anniversary of Claire's death, David took the day off work. He expected to be overwhelmed by grief again, but instead found himself moving through the day with a tender sadness that felt almost like companionship. He drove to the beach house where they had spent that weekend the previous year, walking the shoreline alone as clouds scudded across the sky. Following Claire's wishes, he scattered some of her ashes where the waves met the sand, watching as they were carried out to sea. 1 year, he said aloud. I made it, Claire. That evening back home, he lit a candle in the kitchen window and opened Claire's favorite bottle of wine. Lily and Jack called, as he knew they would, and they shared memories of their mother, laughing more than crying this time. After they hung up, David took his wine to the back porch and sat watching the stars appear one by one. The maple tree rustled in the evening breeze, its leaves beginning to turn gold at the edges. He thought about the cycles of life, how things ended and began again, how grief changed but never truly disappeared, how love remained even when the person was gone. A shooting star streaked across the sky, brief and beautiful. I still miss you, David whispered. But I'm finding my way back, just like you wanted. In the year since Claire's death, David had learned that grief wasn't something to overcome but to incorporate. It became part of him, changing him forever but not ending him. The pain had carved deeper spaces inside him, creating room for greater compassion, deeper appreciation of small joys, more profound connections with others. The following week, he returned to the grief support group as usual. A new member sat, nervously on the edge of his chair, a man about David's age with the shell-shocked look of recent loss. My wife died 3 weeks ago, the man said when his turn came. Car accident, it was so sudden. I don't know how to do this. After the meeting, David approached him, offering his hand. The first months are the hardest, he said. But you're not alone. The man looked at him with desperate hope. Does it ever get better? David considered the question carefully. Not better, he said finally. Different. The grief changes shape. It makes room for other things again eventually. I can't imagine that right now. You don't have to, David said gently. Just get through today, then tomorrow. That's enough for now. As he drove home that night, David realized he had quoted Claire without thinking. Her words about taking one day at a time during her illness, now offering comfort to someone else. It felt right somehow, a way of keeping her wisdom alive in the world. The house was quiet when he arrived home, but no longer felt empty. Photographs of Claire smiled from the walls. Plants she had loved thrived on windowsills. Books she had read filled the shelves. David moved through the rooms they had shared, touching familiar objects, feeling her presence not as a ghost but as a foundation. On the kitchen counter he found a letter from Lily. A real paper letter, rare in this digital age. She wrote about her research, her friends, a boy she had met who made her laugh. At the end she had written, I saw a double rainbow yesterday and immediately thought of Mom. Isn't it strange how she's still showing up in the most unexpected moments? I think that's what love does. It outlasts everything, even death. David folded the letter carefully and placed it in the box where he kept Claire's letters to him. His daughter had understood something it had taken him a year to learn, that love transformed but never ended, that Claire lived on in each of them. Outside, the wind picked up, sending leaves swirling across the yard. Another season turning, life continuing its endless cycle. David stood at the window, watching the dance of light and shadow, feeling, for the first time in a very long while, a quiet sense of peace.